Hi guys, I've been waiting to record a video on this topic for very long, as this had been a subject of personal struggle and personal contention for very long, ever since I have started to embark on a journey where the Bible took on more authority than merely tradition and what has been presented us as facts and truth out there. So today, in preparation for a video on the Passover, on the festival of Pesach, which will be under another playlist, let me just begin by saying I'm adding this subject today, the question around Easter. Let's say Easter versus Pesach. I'm putting this on the gray areas playlist for a simple reason, and that is that the core of what we're exploring today is the core claim of Christianity. And what has happened with Christianity since a small Jewish band of believers had taken the good news of Yeshua the Messiah and start spreading that all over the world, a lot has happened to the message. A lot has begun to flow into this message. A lot has been syncretized into this message of Jesus, this good news of the gospel of Jesus the Messiah, or shall we say Yeshua the Messiah. This morning, as I was preparing for this talk, I had an in-depth conversation with ChatGPT. Now, if this video would ever be viewed in future, this would also reveal the time frame that we are operating in, this whole discovery of how AI can aid us in finding the right sources and finding the right information. But let me put it this way. It was a fascinating to and fro dialogue to figure out what is it that we're dealing with when we look at the Jesus Christ of Christianity versus the biblical Yeshua. Now you're making a video on Easter and Pesach, exactly the point. The contentious matter, if we look at Easter, is not the fact that Easter is not celebrated by good people and by arguably people that love God, that are really better people than I am, and they are really people that get up early in the morning and see God's face. So there's no doubt that this matter falls into the category where we have to deal with it in an overtly sensitive style. Before we dig into the Easter Passover debate, have a look at this. At the core of the debate, do we celebrate Easter or do we celebrate Pesach? We actually have to ask another question. How did the biblical feast, the feast that the Bible is express about, this festival of Pesach, Passover, how did that festival that basically points to the same event, the death and the resurrection of Jesus or Yeshua the Messiah, how did that end up not only getting a different name, but getting called by the name of a pagan god, or pagan goddess rather? And how did it happen that the express detail that Yahweh tells us how should we deal with the Pesach got thrown out the window and got replaced by traditions no one is questioning? Think of hot cross buns, Easter bunnies, Easter eggs, and all the weird stuff that we allow to be syncretized into the festival about the death and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah. And by the way, this concept of a Messiah laying down his own earthly life, his own earthly agenda in surrender to the Creator, this is the crux of what we believe in Christianity. But you see, this whole Easter bunny versus Pesach debate leaves the question with me, do I even agree with Christianity? Because it feels to me that the contentious matter that we're dealing with is that something caused the Jewish festival of Pesach to transform into not only a festival called by the name of a pagan goddess, it got severed from the Bible in a number of ways. Why are we sitting with this really difficult matter? How did it happen, rather, that the church, or the institution we call church, has embraced a festival that clearly, if you dig into the matter, is wrapped in paganism? How did that happen? How did it happen in the light of a Jesus that said he does not speak any of his own words? He did not come to do his own agenda, but the will of the Father. How did it happen that that Jesus of Easter doesn't seem to be paying any attention to the Bible? And concurrently, the followers of this Jesus doesn't seem to worry at all either. And this leaves us with a question: how did that happen? Now, first of all, before we look at Easter as a festival, because this is important, and a lot of these things you may have picked up along the lines, but I think today is important that we give it a name, that we give it handles. It seems that as the gospel, as the good news of Jesus exchanged hands from a Jewish community, from a band of Jewish brothers who witnessed Yeshua with their own eyes and said, that guy is the guy. We've seen it. We've seen him in action, but we've also seen him lay down his life and getting out of the grave and disappear, just like the prophets prophesied. How did it happen that that band of believers ended up exchanging hands with Gentile communities, and the gospel eventually ending up in a mostly non-Jewish or non-Hebrew speaking community? How did it end up that that transition caused the new believers, the new converts, to drift away from the text? There's only one reason for that. There was a theology in the beginning of Christianity, and by talking about the beginning of Christianity, I am referring to the historical birth of the church outside of Jewish boundaries. There was a definite decision made to sever the faith from its Jewish roots. Why would that be? Now, there's several theories for that. One theory is that the church fathers kind of propagated the idea that the Jewish people crucified Christ, and for that reason we need to cut ties with them, because they are held responsible for the death of Jesus. That is the one theory. There was the birth of an idea that Jesus entered into a new covenant that superseded the covenant that Yahweh had with the Jewish people, or that Yahweh had with Abram and the generations to follow. That idea seemed to have found its place within early Greek Christianity. And as church doctrine developed, and as the church later on became amalgamated with state, as the church and state became a single, almost a unified organization, that whole idea of a new theology, a new doctrine, a new covenant superseded everything that Yahweh said. And what is the problem with that? The problem with that is that would render Yahweh into a liar, but it would also render Jesus into a liar, because he said, I didn't come to abolish the prophets. If you think of Matthew 5, he said he doesn't speak any word of his own. He doesn't do his own will. Jesus never hinted towards throwing out the baby with the bathwater. What Jesus did hint to, and what he did allude to, is coming to give fulfillment, to bring fulfillment to the promises. And we must remember one thing. If we look at Matthew 5, 17, 18, 19, Jesus refers to the end of times. He says, until heaven and earth passes away, nothing in the Torah gets thrown out. Nothing. Until heaven and earth passes away. Has heaven and earth passed away? No. So clearly, that which Yahweh has instituted in the Torah still stands. Obviously, the question is, what did Jesus do? What exactly was his mission? What did he accomplish, and what did he fulfill? Now, all of these things we will look at over time. But today the question is, as the Jewish believers exchanged hands with a primarily Gentile community to take over the message and propagate it, run with it, which is great, by the way. But what I am against this is the fact that as that transition happened, there seems to have been a sever between the Jewish roots. I almost want to say the Hebrew roots, and I don't like the word Hebrew roots because it's loaded with so much modern stigma. But let's for a moment entertain the fact that all of Christianity has biblical Hebrew roots, Jewish roots if you want to. It's interesting that the Jewish people were cut off. And a new faith, a new religion was born that seemed to have lost its fidelity with the scriptures, that seems to have lost its fidelity with Yahweh as the only one. Okay, my apologies. I had to restart this video as our offices today are a complete building site and we don't have electricity. Somebody has apparently stolen cables from Eskom and it has taken quite a while to fix this. We're talking about the contentious matter of how the church has almost grown out of its Jewish roots into a new identity that seemed to have wanted liberation from its Jewishness. Isn't that ironic? Jesus having been born a Jew and Jesus having made all these profound statements about his Jewishness, still Christianity wanted out. Isn't there something we should really and honestly question? Why and how did that happen? That the Jewishness of Jesus has almost lost its place and that the Jewishness of our faith fundamentally become a problem. If we sever ourselves from the Jewishness of Jesus, we sever ourselves from his entire identity, from his lineage, from his family history, from the context that the entire Bible up to that point, up to the point where Jesus becomes flesh, up to that point, we sever ourselves from all of that. And then the Jesus character takes on a universally accepted, cosmic universally accepted shape that has no foundation, no family history, no context. And by the way, you'll remember Jesus saying to Pontius Pilate, he says, "For this reason I was born, to be a witness to the truth." What truth was Jesus referring to that he was born as a witness for? Could it be the Word of God? Well, I think it is. So this is the philosophical and theological conundrum that we're faced with. We have to sit with the fact that in Christianity there's a Jesus Christ that has taken on an identity very different to the identity of the biblical Yeshua, the Jesus born in Nazareth, who's grown and lived, learned obedience according to the Bible, who's followed Yahweh, who's eventually fulfilled every bit of the Torah that was pointing to him and has become our perfect offering. That Yeshua has almost transformed into a complete new character with very different attributes, with a very different identity. And I think as believers, we need to be honest before we speak about Easter, because Easter is a problem in itself. The fact that we call a festival by the name of another God, it just doesn't sit right. This is not the style of Yahweh. If we look at Yahweh, he's all about fidelity. He's all about, no, you don't drag other gods into the proverbial bed. That is not the covenant, that's not the marital commitment that Yahweh wants of his people. We have to deal with the fact that the reason we call a festival in Christianity by the name of another God has to raise red lights. So let's talk about Easter. Now, first of all, the name Easter is derived from an Old English word called Eostre. And this is a pagan festival celebrating Spring Equinox and basically the giving or renewal of life. It is a fertility festival in its pagan origins. Take note of that, because this is where we get the Easter bunnies and the Easter eggs from. It is celebrating the goddess of fertility. Interesting. Jesus, resurrection, goddess of fertility. Is there a link? I don't know. But what I do find curious, if you read the history of Easter, we find that missionaries that went into the Anglo-Saxon world, it was their custom to embrace the local traditions, the pagan traditions, and incorporate that into their message. Now, on one level, that sounds almost idealistic. It almost sounds amazing that these missionaries were willing to accommodate and flex. You know, Paul, even in the New Testament, makes mention of a similar strategy where he said he would become anything if that would be in assistance to people coming to faith. So he was willing to almost bend his own customs and traditions to become that so that other people could hear him and hear his message. So we have that side, which kind of gives us more grace for the process, but we're still dealing with the fact that Easter is a festival unto the goddess of fertility. And that festival in the early period of the Gentile church has become part of the church has become syncretized into the culture, into the biblical culture. But then the next thing that happened is a terrible thing. Out with the baby in the bathwater and in with paganism. So what happened over time is this amalgamation of the pagan traditions into Christianity evolved to a point where Easter became the official term for the death, but more so the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you see, you can almost draw the parallel between the new life, the idea that the Spring Equinox and the fertility and new life concept coming out of that celebration. There's something of that in the death and the resurrection of Jesus. I get that. But we still sit with a problem that Christians today celebrate a festival named after a pagan god. And that is the problem. Because at its core, it is breaking fidelity with the God of the Bible. And it leaves us with a tension. Can the Jesus Christ of Easter be the same person as the Yeshua of the Bible? This is not for me to judge or to call, but it is for me to point out that we seriously need to think about this. We make a choice between the words of Yahweh and the words of a movement that tolerates paganism and that tolerates idolatry. Even worse, it celebrates it. Next up, we will look at the festival, the beautiful festival of Passover, called in Hebrew Pesach. Ciao.